So, Candela, what's it like working for a large car manufacturer?
You'd be surprised, actually. You hear so much about cutthroat competition amongst managers in my type of company, but in fact, as someone starting out on the management ladder, I get a lot of backup from senior staff. We have twice-weekly get-togethers where we talk through our difficulties and come up with ideas and solutions. It's great. I don't get the feeling that it's sink or swim at all.
And you, Henry?
Well, as you'd expect, working in hospital administration, there's plenty of red tape. We have to stick to the rules fairly carefully because at the end of the day, people's health's involved. And we're publicly accountable. But that doesn't mean there's no room for inventiveness. We're always looking for ways of streamlining procedures and making efficiency gains.
And saving taxpayers' money.
That's right.
Now, Sonia, what's it like working for a .com?
It's not exactly a .com. As a matter of fact, it's more a software developer. And it really suits me. You know, I nearly always turn up at work wearing jeans and a t-shirt, which is great for a manager. And everyone talks to everyone else in a really relaxed way. There's none of that them and us feeling between management and staff that you get in other industries. I mean, in most ways, the staff are more expert than the managers. And what about you, Omar?
My company, as you know, is a consumer products company, and we're all organised in divisions, and the divisions in teams, and we're all competing against each other. Our pay is performance-related, and nobody gets the same. Getting ahead and even keeping your job depends on your performance.
And how's performance measured, Omar? Is there a yardstick?
Not really. In the end, it boils down to performance in comparison with other teams and divisions.
Sounds quite a rat race.
For me, that's business.
What do you think makes a great leader as opposed to a great manager? Because they're quite different things, aren't they?
And I think I've worked a lot of places where a lot of senior people haven't really been leaders, they've been managers. And I think I'd say probably a good leader has vision and can see how to develop and take things forward and is inspirational. Really, a manager, I think, is more about the implementation of that vision. And I think too many people who are in leadership roles get bogged down with the nitty-gritty management side, which is probably not what they should be doing. But I suppose it takes a strong leader and a confident one who believes in their team to take a step back. And I think really they should. I don't think they should be too hands-on.
Can you describe a bad leader to me?
I think someone who has a team of quite experienced, good people who won't give them the space to get on and do their job and is overbearing and involved, and doesn't take a step back and give people the responsibility to get on with their role. And I suppose who doesn't give a person room to grow and the opportunity to develop their career, because I think that happens a lot, that you just are expected to tick along and not expect anything back from your job, whereas if you're good at it and reasonably ambitious, you want to know you're going somewhere.
How would you describe empowerment? And how can workers be empowered, do you think?
I think empowerment is giving someone the opportunity to decide the directional strategy of a job and agreeing on it, and then leaving them to get on and do it, and be in the background to help them if they need it, but not to be breathing down their neck. And I suppose it is that feeling of responsibility and ownership that makes people feel empowered. I think if you work with someone who really lacks confidence to give their team responsibility, it's very difficult to break out of that cycle.
And has managing techniques, or have managing people, changed over the last in the last 10 years?
I don't know, I'm probably a bit cynical, but I think there's a lot, certainly that I've noticed in the organisations I've worked in, there are a lot of steps that are taken to be seen to be empowering individuals, and so I think things probably at a superficial level look to have changed, but whether they really have deep down, I'm not so sure.
How do you think people could be managed in order to get the very best from them?
I think to get the most out of them, you want them to feel empowered, that they're achieving, that they're developing, that there are opportunities ahead of them that they can strive to work to, that they're under a manageable amount of pressure, that they're getting the right kind of support. I think what a lot of people lack is a kind of mentor and someone that will help them develop in their career, and you can become very stale if you don't have that. So I'd say that would be important to people as well.
So, we've seen a bit about how internal communications is quite a neglected area in business. Now, I'd like to go over to you and ask you if you have any ideas how it can be improved. Larry, what about you?
Well, I guess we all have a tendency to overdo things a bit. I mean, we think we have to reply immediately to everything that comes in, and it becomes a bit of a time waster, always sending off messages left, right and centre. I think it's probably better to have a fixed time. You know, that quiet time just after lunch or just before you knock off for the day, and deal with them then.
Well, possibly. I guess this might depend on the type of job you're doing. Still, that's something we can discuss in a minute. And you, Marina?
I'm very interested in the quality of the message. It says so much about the person, and if it's well written, it's a good deal easier to understand. So I'd say to people that they should avoid incomplete sentences or sentences without verbs, when writing, of course. Good English creates a good impression.
An interesting point. And that's another one we can come back to. I mean, it might depend who you're writing to and what you're writing about. What's your advice, Magdi? Mine's a question of respect for colleagues and basic working formality. If you're busy, you can be sure that most of your colleagues are too, so they don't want you barging into their offices without warning with some minor query or being continually phoned up. Let them get on with their work, and if they're not urgent, save your queries for coffee time. Thanks, Magdi. That's partly a time management question, isn't it? Now you, Therese.
I just think common courtesy is such an important part of office life. Greeting people when you arrive at the office, not losing your temper or shouting at people, however overworked you may feel. You have to work with each other, and you might as well make the circumstances as pleasant as possible.
I absolutely agree. So now let's take these points one by one and see how you all feel about them. Now the first one was about...
1.
Okay, let's get started. Has everyone got a copy of the agenda?
Yes, thanks. Yeah.
Great. Would anyone like to take minutes, or shall we just keep a list of action points?
Action points would be fine, Matt.
Okay, Piotr. Would you like to do that then?
Sure, no problem.
Thanks. So anyway, thank you all for coming. The purpose of this meeting's to discuss how we go about investigating the East European market and seeing whether our products would have an outlet there. So the first point today is who should actually go and have a look around. I personally am pretty tied up till the end of May, so it might be better if it was someone else. Jane, could you give us your views on this?
Sure, thanks, Matt. I honestly don't think it's that urgent. I mean, it can easily wait till June, which is less than a couple of months away, and then we can make sure we have enough time.
2.
So, if I could just sum up, what you think is that even if he hasn't been on time this time, as a customer he's too valuable to lose.
So we should remind him, but in a very friendly and polite way.
That's right. I mean, he really does give us a lot of business. Although, as you can see from the books, if something doesn't happen soon, we're going to have problems with our cash flow. I mean, we've got our invoices to pay as well.
Point taken. Let's remind him and give him another week then.
Fine.
Anything else to be said on this, or can we move on to the next point?
3.
So quite frankly, I don't think it's good enough. I mean, we agreed to have the new procedures in place by the end of the month, which is in 2 weeks' time, and we're going to be nowhere near that target because the people responsible for training haven't even scheduled the training yet.
Thanks very much for that, Salim. Now, can we hear what other people have to say?
Yes, it's all very well to criticise, but we've had plenty of problems, you know. In my last job, people used to just criticise. I had a boss who
Look, that's all very interesting, but can we keep to the issue in hand? The point is, there is a risk, and it will be bad to have an accident just when we've fallen behind with our training schedule. So let's get to the reasons for it and see how we can get things back on the rails.
4.
So we clearly all agree on this, so let's not waste any more time and move on to point number 5, which is whether the component really meets our specifications. Any thoughts on that? Anyone? Martin?
It clearly performs to specifications. All the tests I've run so far show that. It's just that we might have difficulty fitting it into the space we thought we had for it. It might mean we have to do a little bit of redesigning.
So, in a nutshell, what you think is that it's too large?
Well, it might be, but if they can't make it smaller, then we'll have to make do with it.
But that would add to our costs. I mean, redesigning our machine at this stage has all sorts of other implications.
I know, but the alternative is to source the component elsewhere, and I don't even know if that'll be possible.
I wonder whether it'd be worth it just for one relatively minor component.
We'd have to look into that.
Well, we don't have to decide on this today. Let's think about it a bit more and come back to it, if necessary, next week. Now, let's take a 5-minute break and then start on point number 6.
5. So, we need more information on this issue. Sandra, can you look into it for the next meeting?
Sure.
So, in summary, we've agreed about where we're going to stay, and Sandra's going to investigate prices, which potential customers we're inviting, and what entertainment we're going to give them. So, we're just left with the question of the timing of the event. Any ideas, anyone?
I don't think we want to get everyone together when it's too hot. So, I guess spring would be most suitable.
Yes, because if we're going to do it in January or February, really that's too soon.
Yes, if it was up to me, I'd go for April.
OK, let's come to a quick decision on this. How many people are in favour of April? 5. Anyone against? No. Well, thanks all of you for your time. I think this has been very profitable, and we'll meet again to talk about the other points on Wednesday the 4th at the same time. See you all then.
Boris Shulov, we hear a lot nowadays about customer relationship management, or CRM for short. Can you tell us what it is?
Yes, in simple terms, customer relationship management is the process of integrating marketing, sales, and after-sales service within a business or other organization with the objective of ensuring that customer relationships generate maximum profitability for the company, while in the process maintaining and enhancing those relationships. In other words, by working on these relationships, we can produce more revenues for the company and provide a mechanism which permits companies to stand out or differentiate themselves from their competitors. What I mean by this is that nowadays, as we all know, the products companies produce are frequently almost identical, at least in the eyes of the consumer. And what gives a company a competitive edge is the difference in the quality of service it offers.
This is achieved largely by the use of computer technology, isn't it?
That's right. At the center of CRM are information systems. With computer technology, it's now possible to store and transmit huge amounts of data about individual customers. You know, their preferences, their free time activities, the makeup of their families, and any other details which you think are interesting or useful. And all this information can, at least theoretically, be acted upon by organizations to give their customers personalized individual treatment. To give you a rather basic example, your customer, Mrs. X, buys cosmetics from you. You know from information you've gathered that she has a teenage daughter. Perhaps she'd also like to buy cosmetics for her daughter. You could interest her in a younger range of products, maybe.
In which areas of an organization is CRM most likely to be used?
Well, clearly in those areas which have most contact with customers. To give you a few details, there's marketing automation, which allows you to concentrate your marketing efforts on your most profitable customers and manage your campaigns so that your marketing budget is spent in the most cost-efficient and profitable way. You've perhaps heard of the 20-80 rule, which says that 20% of your customers generate 80% of your profits. Now, the common sense conclusion to be drawn from this statistic is that we should be spending a larger proportion of our marketing budget on that 20% of customers to keep them happy, to encourage them to spend more with us and proportionately less on the remaining 80%.
Interesting. I've also heard of sales automation. Can you explain for all of us what that is?
Sure. Sales automation is information systems providing key backup for the sales process. For example, products a particular customer has bought in the past, discounts they've been given, problems that have arisen when selling to that client, etc. All this makes the sales staff's task much easier. They can offer similar discounts. They're not going to make a mess by offering a far larger or far smaller one. At least, not unless it's part of an informed strategy. They know about problems which have arisen in the past, and they can avoid irritating the customer by repeating them. Then there's the final area.
Customer service, isn't it?
That's right.
Can you explain it a little, please?
Yeah. Customer service as a part of CRM is being able to deal efficiently with problems and queries when they arise in such a way that they actually enhance the customer's feelings of loyalty and satisfaction. After all, the main thrust of CRM is to have loyal and satisfied customers. These are the ones who are most profitable to a company and who pass the company's reputation on by word of mouth to other potential customers.
And the process must be very complex. How is all this data collected and transmitted with a large organization?
The most normal way nowadays is via the internet, because this allows both employees and customers to access information and communicate with each other efficiently.
Very interesting. But I wonder, do organizations manage to handle these vast amounts of data efficiently and effectively? I would have thought these systems are fraught with pitfalls.
How does your company achieve an advantage over its competitors?
Well, I suppose the prime way you'd get an advantage is by offering sufficient quality at the lowest price. And clients are always looking for the lowest price tender. And nowadays, designers and consulting engineers have to compete a lot more on price than they had to maybe 30, 40 years ago. So price is certainly probably the major element. But in more recent years, there's been far more recognition by clients that actually the quality dimension is also needed. If you go for the lowest price, you may not get the best value for money. So now client procurement is much more directed towards getting the right match of quality and price. The result of that being is that when we're submitting tenders to clients to win work, we have to devote a lot of time to demonstrating the quality that we can bring to a particular project. And ways of doing that include the quality of our documents and what we say in our documents. It's also developing a reputation and having past projects that we can show clients and say, look, there's a fantastic quality job we did on that one. Why don't you employ us, because we've got the track record and experience.
So how would you describe the Giffords brand?
The Giffords brand, well, that's quite a tricky one. I think we're branded a lot by the projects, the past projects that we've worked on. So very much in projecting what we're about, we look towards recent projects which have been particularly successful. And one of those has been the Gateshead Millennium Bridge, for which Gifford had to enter a design competition, which was supervised by the Gateshead Metropolitan Council, and there were about 200 entrants, and Gifford teamed up with a leading architectural practice, Wilkinson Eyre and Associates, and jointly we came out with a completely new concept for a bridge. I don't think this type of bridge has ever been constructed before. This bridge had a horizontal axis, so that the entire bridge rotated horizontally to lift over the river to pass ships underneath. And this particular structure's got a lot of international attention since it's been built, and has been quite successful in promoting an image of Gifford more widely.
So you'd use this project as a means of obtaining further contracts, possibly?
Yes, so I think it has demonstrated our creativity and potential for innovation and problem solving in a way which others couldn't do.
That's very good. Just tell me, how do you or Giffords go about getting new contracts?
Well, I suppose one prime route is to look at advertisements, and nowadays within the European Union, all contracts or all public works over a certain size have to be advertised in the Journal of the European Union. So we keep an eye on that and identify contracts which look interesting to us. Other routes, apart from advertisement, and really a very important route, is through personal contact, and preferably through having done previous contracts with a client, establishing a relationship, and particularly if they're a private client or a private company, if they like the work that you've done previously, then they may feel there's no need to advertise. They'll come back to you for future work. And establishing those business relationships and friendly partnering relationships with clients is really vital.
And how would you go about deciding a price for your bid when you're in competition with others?
Well, with great difficulty. There's a number of ways you look at it. One is to assess what the value of the constructed works would be, and assess in percentage terms what a reasonable fee for a designer would be in relation to the ultimate value of the works as constructed. So that would be on a percentage basis or a top-down basis. The other main route would be bottom up, in terms of you itemise all the work, all the tasks that you have to do in order to prepare a design, prepare the contract document, the specifications, probably also supervise the construction of the works, or supervise the works construction contract. So you'd work out all the time on a spreadsheet from the bottom up and see what it comes to.
How many of the contracts that you bid for do you expect to win?
We'd expect to win about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 of straight competitive bids where we're competing maybe against 6 other similar consultants. We would hope to achieve that rate.
Putting together a proposal or bid must be expensive and time consuming. How do you cover the costs of this if you don't win the contract? Or is that just absorbed into a future contract?
The only way you can absorb the cost is out of fees earned on other contracts. So all tenderers have to effectively either recover their costs on other contracts or go out of business. It's as simple as that.
Nasim Bakhtiar?
Hi Nasim, Devika here.
Hi Devika, what's up?
I think it's time to get that proposal together for the board of directors. You know, we were talking around the subject last month when we were having our roundup of points arising from the sales conference. At least it was one of the things that we were talking about.
That's the proposal for a wider range of software, isn't it? Let me just note that down.
That's right. I've just been talking to Lena, and we were both saying that now could be the right time.
Right. Well, Lena's the finance director. Does she reckon we've got the budget for it?
Yes, that's the point. She says that since profits are definitely up this year, we should be looking to plough something back and reduce our tax exposure.
Okay, but the main reason for getting into a new project like this, and it would be a pretty big one, is that our existing clients have been asking for it. That would be the main selling point in the proposal. Our clients want a whole range of compatible applications, compatible with the stuff we're selling them at the moment.
Exactly.
Okay. And what do you want to see in the proposal, Devika?
The reasons for adding to the product range, I guess. I mean, our existing products do well enough, but with the cutthroat market we're in, it wouldn't look too good if we spent a lot of cash developing a whole load of new products which just lost us money.
Well, that doesn't sound too likely at the moment.
No. And could you also specify the types of product we are going to work on? You know, especially stock control tools and applications for automatic online ordering, that sort of thing.
Okay, those will do for a start anyway.
And you'll also have to cover resources in the proposal.
Yes, right.
I mean, this will mean quite a lot of people working on it, and it will swallow a fair amount of cash before we start getting any return on our investment. Fortunately, Lena will be keeping us to a tight budget, though.
Quite. But it would be useful to know what the extra costs involved in this are likely to be.
Okay, so you'd better include a section on them in your proposal, and then hopefully we should have everything pretty clear.
Great. When's the next board meeting?
Wednesday of the week after next. Do you think you can get your proposal together by then?
I'll try to get it ready by Friday of next week if possible, so we can mull it over a bit before giving it to the board, though I can't promise that. Otherwise, definitely by the Wednesday.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks a lot, Nasim.
My pleasure. I'll get cracking on this right away. I've been wanting it to happen for some time now.
Sure.
Anything else, Devika?
Not just now, Nasim. Thanks.
Okay. Bye then.
Bye.
Bye.
Good. Thank you all for coming. Shall we get started then? As you know, the purpose of our meeting is to start thinking about expanding our operations to China. Before getting down to the finer details, please remember that our discussions in this meeting are confidential, okay? So, Catalina's going to get the ball rolling by giving us a brief rundown of the Chinese market. Okay, Cathy?
Sure, Niels, thanks. Now, I'm just going to give you a number of key facts which should help you to concentrate your minds on the opportunities and difficulties of breaking into China. Okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Right. Well, I've got 3 main points to make. Firstly, the Chinese market, unlike markets here in Europe or the US, is growing steadily and rapidly, so it represents a major business opportunity. Last year, the total market in terms of ice cream sales was 23 billion yuan. That's about 2.3 billion euros. So pretty considerable. I've been reading recently that China is likely to overtake the USA as the leading market for consumer goods within the next 25 years. And when you take into account that the market growth rate is a steady 10% a year, you can see that there's an opportunity there if we can get in. Now, my second point. At the moment, there are 5 major players selling on the Chinese market, along with a lot of smaller local companies. These big ones have a market share between them of rather more than half. 57% to be exact, and that's split up between our usual competitors, Nestle, Walls, that is Unilever, and Meadow Gold, with 30% of the market, and a couple of local companies, Yili and Mmvii. I'm not sure I've got the right pronunciation there, but anyway, they've got about 27% of the market. And now my third and final point, to give you a bit more background. In China, on average, people buy far less ice cream than in Europe. The annual purchase is about 1 litre a head, which is still a lot less than the 23 litres per head of the Europeans. So you can see that as Chinese incomes rise, ice cream consumption is a pretty hot prospect.
Thanks, Cathy. That was interesting. Now, any of you got any questions?
Yes. Cathy, can you tell me how Chinese companies are reacting to this competition from abroad? And also how these competitors are going about increasing their market share?
Sure, Paul. I've got something on the biggest national manufacturer. That's Yili. Apparently, they recently announced plans to build more production facilities in different parts of the country. The reasoning behind this is logical. China is a huge country. The distances between major centers such as Shanghai, Beijing and Hong Kong are vast, so they'll then be able to save a lot on transportation costs. Also, if you have a factory in each region, along with a regional product development team, you can adapt your ice creams to regional markets more easily, and thereby satisfy local tastes. That, I think, answers the first part of your question as far as I can. As to the second, while companies have been advertising pretty heavily, their main tactic for gaining more market has been to fight a fierce price war. Most products sell at about 1 to 2 yuan, which is between 10 and 20 cents. So you can imagine that even with cheap production costs, no companies as yet have been announcing big profits there.
Any more questions? Yes, Tanya.
Our products, as you know, are a bit more upmarket than the companies you've mentioned so far. I wonder what sort of price you think we could sell them at. What I want to know is how we would position them.
What, in your experience, is the best way to advertise?
That's a very difficult question to answer because there are different answers for different types of product. And in some cases, the most cost-effective can be the most expensive. So television still remains probably the most expensive medium, but is possibly the best way still of getting to people. And given that our biggest ambition is to sell as much product as we can, then we want to reach as many people as we can most effectively.
And is advertising always the most successful way of promoting a product?
Not entirely. I think there are a number of people who believe that a final decision about a brand is made actually at the point of purchase. So anything that can be done within the store to attract a person, whether it be some sort of promotional activity within the store, or something that actually sits on the shelf and attracts your attention, or just simply the price.
And who decides where something should be advertised?
We in a media company make that decision. We put together a proposal based on the size of the budget, which is a major factor because television is obviously the most expensive medium we can use. But also the sort of time of day or the sort of mood that the person is in will affect the place that we'll advertise. So for example, if we were advertising a cosmetic brand, we might think that women reading a glossy monthly magazine might find that a more appropriate place to see an advertisement for a cosmetic brand or a fragrance, for example, whereas a fairy liquid might well be suited much more to the television and have less of an appeal to people reading a newspaper or a magazine.
And who decides when to go on air on television?
The media company would decide on that, and we would have a budget which would mean that we would have to buy a certain number of slots within prime time, which is generally from about 5:30 in the evening until about 10:30 in the evening. But then again, to get a broad range of potential consumers, we would advertise throughout the day, and for example, the morning time is cheaper than evening time.
Good evening. I'm Serena Godby, and tonight on Your Computer, we're talking about how you can use the internet to buy things and what sort of things the internet can really help you to purchase. Now that questions of security and internet fraud are no longer such an issue, e-commerce and e-shopping are becoming an increasingly attractive option to both businesses and consumers. I have 5 people with me in the studio: the writer and broadcaster Bruce Myers, up-and-coming young actress Tanya Ballum, computer programmer Paddy Smith, Petra Ferrero, the fashion critic, and of course our regular expert on this programme, Salim Mahmood. Now, if I could just kick off by asking each of you about something you bought recently and why you used the internet to buy it. What about you, Bruce?
Well, you know, I use the internet quite a lot for my work. I research articles and the like, stuff on the economy, background facts and what have you. Anyway, I'd been thinking for some time that it was time for me to get away from it all and take a break. Normally I just call in at my local travel agents while I'm in the high street, and they book the tickets and send them round. Anyway, almost subconsciously, the other day, while I was reading the online edition of the Financial Times, I clicked on this banner ad just to see how much things might cost, you know. I certainly wasn't thinking of booking anything up there and then. Still, it came as a bit of a shock, I must say, to see how much cheaper things are online and how much money I could have been saving.
Yes, they say you can pick up some great bargains on the internet, but I still think that unless you shop around plenty, you can get taken for a pretty big ride.
Tell us about it, Tanya.
Well, before I buy something, I like to see it, touch it, get the feel of it. So I'm most likely to use the yellow pages online to find the local showroom and one or two others, which street they're in, that sort of thing. It's not bad because nowadays you can filter out pop-up boxes and such like. Then I go down there and check if they have any special offers, see what's going, perhaps kick the tyres and take a test drive if they'll let me. I mean, I don't think we'll ever want to make a purchase like that online, do you?
Well, not as yet, but you never know. It could come, I suppose. Paddy, you're next.
I've just changed jobs, and that's been a pretty big thing for me. It means I've had to move, and I've been using the web for checking out estate agents and what they've got on their books. See what's going on in the area, and look at a few photos before getting on the phone.
Petra, have you ever used the internet for shopping?
Not for shopping, actually. Last time I was in London, I bought a new PC, but they didn't have the one I wanted in stock, only a showroom model. So I arranged to have it sent on, which they did. I used my old one to check where it had got to and when it was arriving.
I think that's wonderful, actually, to be able to do that.
So do I, because at least I knew it was coming, even if it didn't get here any quicker.
Finally, you, Salim.
I've been thinking about doing one of those online degrees, you know. So initially I went to Google and typed in the words, and then actually I clicked on various sponsored links, which were pretty good, because, you know, they took me direct to more or less what I was looking for, and I was able to look at the different options and what they were offering, all in less than an hour. I mean, 10 years ago it would have taken me weeks.
Great. So let's go on from there and just consider together what options there are.
How can advertisers use the internet, do you think?
The internet is a difficult one for advertisers at the moment because it's so new that I don't think a lot of people know quite how to use it. People tend to use the internet for things that they're interested in. The places where the internet can be very successful are in areas where there is a high interest in the product involved. So, for example, the motor car industry, where you do a lot of research before you buy a car. Nowadays, most people do their research on the internet, and therefore to advertise on the internet is an obvious way to get people, when they're again in the right frame of mind, to be advertised to. And that can be just simply brand advertising, which tells people a little bit more about the car or redirects them to the website, which will give them more information, or it can be direct response advertising, which will encourage them to send off for a brochure or to ask for a test drive, which then gets them into the dealership in order to get the dealer himself then to persuade the customer that he might want to buy that particular model.
Can the internet be used to advertise normal household products as well?
There are ways that people try and get round that issue by the website or the advertisement on the internet actually trying to give a solution to something. And what I'm thinking of here is that Persil, for example, the manufacturer of detergents, has a part of its website which talks about tips and hints of how to get rid of stains out of clothes. So you might go and say, you might go into a search engine and say, I want to get rid of a stain on my shirt, a wine stain, and the search engine would then direct you to the Persil site, which would then possibly encourage you to buy Persil to get rid of that stain if it was the right solution.
So how would advertising on the internet increase sales or attract new customers?
I suppose in the same way that advertising in any medium will work. It's not a static medium, so it's probably mistaken to use static images on the internet. It's very much nearer, very much more akin to television in that respect, so that you can do a lot more with it. There's a lot of what are called viral ads being put out now by fairly normal major international companies who are making ads to look like they're spoof ads, but they're actually made by big advertising agencies at vast expense, because they might be a spoof on an existing ad, or they might do something that you wouldn't necessarily expect an advertiser to do. And then they're sent around to a few people who will then pass them on to 100 of their people in their mailing list, who will then pass them on and on and on. And that's an interesting way where advertising is developing, because at the end of the 30 seconds or whatever, you suddenly realise that it is actually a brand message.
If a business wanted to set up an e-commerce operation or sell its products over the internet, what would be the best way to go about it?
I think it depends very much on what brand they're trying to sell. The danger is that there are now so many different websites that it would be a very difficult thing, I think, to set up an e-commerce site from scratch that could be successful, because just about every market you would want is catered for. The main reason that people go to the internet, I think, is because they can shop around for price, and if you're offering something that offers people better value for money, then there's an opportunity then to attract people's attention. Otherwise, I think small companies trying to set up e-commerce nowadays would find it very difficult to achieve, because most of the major manufacturers in the world are now savvy to internet and setting up their own websites, which have a lot more money spent on them.
So, our company's been in existence for more than 15 years now, and during that time we have, of course, I suppose just like everyone else, experienced big changes, probably more than most industries. Our products have evolved and our production processes have changed out of all recognition. Our customers have also become more savvy and more demanding, and the whole global marketplace has been transformed. So we've had to adapt our sales activities to meet the challenges. 10 years ago, most of our sales were done by sales staff making personal visits to prospects and explaining our products, how they worked, and their selling points. Now, all that area of activity has been declining because our customers know more now, and our products, of course, are much more intuitive, so there's not so much explanation needed. Sales by visiting reps have plummeted from about 40% to less than 20%. And another big change that you can see on the charts, although not quite so big, is that people just don't buy our software in shops so much these days. Over-the-counter sales volumes are about 10% lower than they were 10 years ago. On the other hand, though everyone hates being rung up about products, we find it surprisingly effective and comparatively cheap. Less time-consuming, no travel expenses. What we do is actually call up prospects, that is, likely companies, potential customers, and make an intelligent sales pitch. Over the past 10 years, these sales have soared from just a tenth of our total to around a quarter of our products, which is pretty good. Our other big success story, I suppose, is fairly predictable because, of course, 10 years ago, few companies, or perhaps almost none, were online, and the whole concept of e-commerce was in its infancy. I'm proud to admit, though, that we were among the pioneers, and this has really now rocketed to become our most important sales activity. As a result, we can sell much higher volumes nowadays with just about the same staffing levels as a decade ago. That in turn means better margins, and these are really driving our profitability.
The only other sales activity we do has been receding, and we're hard put to really know the reason. That's this one here, which has shrunk from 15 to just 3%. People just don't fill in coupons or write in for things anymore. I mean, we still advertise in the trade press and in specialist magazines, more than anything to maintain brand awareness. But I suppose people like to go online and find things through Google or some other search engine where they can download things instantly. Of course, people feel a bit more confident about using credit cards online as well.
Richard Slade speaking.
Hello, Mr. Slade. You don't know me. My name's Rosa Levy, and I work for CSS Security.
Okay, I've only got a few minutes.
Yes, I'm sure you're very busy, so I'll be brief. We specialise in providing security not just for buildings and properties, but also for employees so that they can do their jobs in the safest possible conditions and work with confidence.
So why do you think we need your services?
I don't know at the moment, Mr. Slade, but with your permission, I'd like to ask you a few very quick questions to see if there's anything we can do which your company could benefit from. Do you mind? It won't take long.
Okay, go ahead, but make it quick.
Thank you very much. First, can you tell me, have any of your staff ever been attacked by members of the public or by clients of your company?
Well, that's rather a sensitive question, so I'll only answer very generally. From time to time, we've had members of staff who've been shouted at, or on 1 or 2 occasions physically threatened.
And where have those incidents happened? In the office, or when, for example, they're showing a client a property?
From time to time on the telephone, though our staff are trained to deal with that. On odd occasions here on our premises, and several times, as you say, when visiting properties.
And these members of staff, would I be right in thinking, when they visit properties, are generally working on their own?
Generally speaking, yes.
Can you tell me what protection you offer them when they're working alone outside the office?
Well, we have an arrangement with a large mobile phone company. If one of our staff members presses a number on their phone, a call comes straight through to us. We then ring the person concerned, you see. If they're in a dangerous situation, they can press the number without anyone realizing. If necessary, after that we call the police.
I see. And one last question. Do you find this work satisfactorily? Is there anything you would like to see improved?
Frankly, it's not too satisfactory because sometimes there's nobody in the office. And there was one occasion quite recently when the worker in question felt threatened. She wasn't actually physically attacked, but she didn't feel it was safe to answer her mobile, and we were unable to locate her exactly.
So you'd like to be able to offer your workers round-the-clock protection and be able to locate them automatically if an incident occurs?
That would be ideal.
Well, Mr. Slade, that's exactly the sort of service we'd be able to offer you, and probably at a price that you would find very competitive with your present service. Would you be interested in hearing about what we have to offer?
Yes, I think so, quite probably.
Well, that's great. Perhaps we could set up a meeting and I could show you exactly what we can do.
Okay.
Would sometime this week suit you?
Let me have a look in my diary. I could do Friday afternoon at about 4 p.m.
Friday at 4. That's fine by me. I'll come to your offices, shall I?
Yes, I'll meet you at the reception desk.
OK, fine. I'll look forward to meeting you then. And thank you very much for your time, Mr. Slade.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So, come in and take a seat.
Thanks. And thanks for finding the time to see me.
Not at all. Sorry it's a bit late on a Friday afternoon.
No, that's fine. I'm used to working all hours.
Right. Now, tell me about your company's staff protection service. What does it consist of?
OK. Now, as I understood from our phone conversation, you already have a service with a mobile phone operator. They alert you when a member of your staff presses a button to signal that they've got a problem.
That's right. But the service has its limitations, as I mentioned to you on the phone.
Right. So what we do is provide a more complete service. When a member of staff feels threatened or in danger, they press a button and alert us. Our service operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which means first that your staff know that they'll always get a response. Second, that the response will always be immediate. And third, that the people dealing with the call, that's us, are specially trained to deal with these types of situations.
Okay, so far. But what do you do when you get an emergency call?
Well, it's not exactly an emergency call. The employee doesn't have to call us. All he or she has to do is press a button and that alerts us. We then call the employee, and if they answer, we ask them the nature of the problem and take it from there.
Take it from there?
Well, clearly in some situations the worker may just want to let someone know that the client is acting strangely, but they don't feel in any immediate danger. In this case, they have a code word, and we can give them advice, tell them how they should proceed and perhaps just generally to calm them down so that they don't feel quite so threatened. It really helps in these situations if they know there's someone there if they need them. We can also alert your office of the potential problem, and if the situation warrants it, we can call the police.
How will the police know where to go?
Because your staff will be supplied with equipment which is basically a slightly adapted mobile phone, but which also contains a satellite tracking system, so we know where they are to within a few metres. Of course, we make sure that the employees know this and sign an acceptance form when they get the equipment. You don't want to be accused of spying on them when they're not working.
No, of course not. That's a good point. But I'll tell you why I'm interested. In the last year or so, we've had a couple of incidents involving staff. Of course, they're given some training on how to handle difficult customers or tenants, but about 3 months ago, a member of staff was visiting one of the properties we manage, and he was actually physically attacked by the tenant of the property. You may have read about it in the local press. He had no opportunity to make a phone call, let alone have a phone conversation. Fortunately, he wasn't badly hurt, but he was badly shaken and was off work for a month after that. It's that sort of situation that we want to avoid.
Precisely. And in that case, he'd just have pressed the button and not responded to our phone call. Often just the fact that the phone rings is enough to make a potential attacker desist. We'd then have alerted your office, or if there was no one in the office, we'd call a contact number you'd have supplied us with, and at the same time, we'd have phoned the police.
That sounds fine. But the other incident we had was when one of our workers called in saying she was being threatened, and we responded by calling the police. The police, however, took nearly 45 minutes to come to her rescue. Again, fortunately, nothing very serious happened to her, but it could have been very serious.
We actually try to keep track of the police. We direct them to the location. We phone every 5 or 10 minutes to find out what the situation is and if they've resolved it. Our aim is to provide the completest possible protection without actually giving your staff bodyguards. But if the police have been informed, it's the police who have to deal with the situation. You and we have done everything we can.
And the cost of this? What's the bottom line?
Well, that's the interesting part. It really isn't going to hurt. The costs you'll have are for leasing the equipment, a more sophisticated mobile phone. The charge you'll have to pay for that is really not very high, especially when you consider it in the context of the confidence and security it will give your staff. All you have to pay, apart from that, is a fixed monthly charge, about the same as you'd pay if your burglar alarm was connected to us, and nothing else. There are no extra costs and no hidden charges.
Not even when one of our staff presses the emergency button?
Certainly not. The last thing we want is people to be calculating the cost of calling for help. Look, I have a list of our charges here.
And can you tell me the names of other clients you have, other companies who use this service? Good evening and welcome to Business Growth, the weekly program about business and finance. My name is Max Edwards, and tonight we're going to look at that recurring nightmare, the sales forecast, where sales and finance directors bang their heads together, supposedly gaze into a crystal ball, and then pull some figures out of the air. Or perhaps it's not quite like that. We asked 5 company directors to tell us how they do it, and how accurate their forecasts have been in the past. First, Olivia Howe of SPG Holidays. How do you do it?
Well, I'm basically an economist, so sales forecasts are really not my speciality. But I am asked about how general circumstances might affect our sales figures, and I usually give a projection for bank rates and how they'll affect demand. Last year, though, the company actually underestimated its sales forecast quite considerably when the holidays we sell suddenly, rather unexpectedly, caught on, and everyone, it seemed, was wanting to go on one. I mean, we used to think of our holidays as a niche product, and suddenly they seemed to be mainstream.
So you were running to catch up with demand?
Exactly.
Jaime Almendro, you're a director of the up-and-coming Spanish clothing retailers Proximo, which is appearing in every shopping mall in Europe. How do you predict sales?
Oh, in any number of ways, but my particular contribution comes from my involvement with marketing and market research. I and my team track our rivals' activities and likely sales, and on the basis that whatever they can do, we can do better, we work out what they're selling and add on a percentage. Like Olivia, we also fell short of our forecast last year when a Spanish Formula One driver won the championship, and at the same time we talked him into wearing our clothes. That really was a knockout, and we hurriedly had to source extra suppliers.
Fabulous. Gary Summerwell, Managing Director of the bicycle importers Free Wheel. How do you do your sales forecast?
Hard to tell, really. I mean, I've been to business school and learnt all the conventional techniques, like making computer extrapolations based on past sales and such like. But honestly, I think, in the end, I just go on a hunch and, as you so nicely put it, pull a figure out of the air. You know, what I imagine will be the sales for next year. Because however much calculating you do, you're never going to get it quite right. It's always, in my opinion, better to be optimistic and plan for more sales than fewer. Sometimes you have a hiccup though, like the time a year or two ago when someone comparing bikes in a magazine said ours were overpriced for what they were. Completely untrue, of course, but sales took a bit of a nosedive for several months. We survived though. I think good quality and good service always survive if you stick in there and believe in what you're doing.
Thanks, Gary. Sylvie Lemaitre, your company La Chaise is a leading player in the French furniture market. How do you go about making sales predictions?
It's a complex process, as you know, Max, and I really don't agree with Gary about computer extrapolations. I do think they have a place, but my role is more to look at how our promotional activities can affect sales figures and what we can do as a company to increase our sales. So I look at the money we are thinking of spending and what bearing this will have on how much we sell. I really believe that what you spend in that area should have a quantifiable effect on what you sell. You've got to know that your investment is paying off. Of course, there are always the things you can't predict, like the fire that destroyed our factory in Cognac last winter and meant we couldn't complete all our orders on time.
Bad luck, in other words.
Very.
Thank you, Sylvie. Finally, Nesreen Nasser. You're director of one of the Middle East's most important translation and interpretation consultancies. How important are sales forecasts for a company like yours?
Very important. Though I should say that though we make annual forecasts, we do adjust them on a monthly basis, as I expect all the rest of you do. They're important because we have to get our staffing levels right. We have to be training the right number of new personnel, and we have, like everyone else, to keep a tight control on our cash flow. So we do sales forecasts and cash flow forecasts, and my part is to get our agents in the field to tell us what their likely needs are going to be. I then collate this information and pass it on. Even so, over the past few years, demand has been growing faster than we can train new personnel and retain them. A lot of staff, after a time, tend to go freelance, and this has meant that rather too frequently recently we've had to turn down lucrative contracts that we'd counted on in our forecasts.
Very frustrating.
Very. And in a labour-intensive industry like ours, not one with an easy solution. How do you think the theatre business is different from other businesses?
Well, probably in no way at all. But the theatre business isn't just a business. The business side of it, i.e. something which has to produce a product that people want and which people are prepared to pay for, is exactly the same as any other business. It must be planned, it must be budgeted, it must be marketed, and it must be successful in order to survive. However, the theatre is also an art form, and you can't apply strict business standards to art. You just can't. The theatre has to have in some way, shape or form the right to fail and the right to be unpopular.
And when a new production is going to be put on, where does the initial impulse come from?
The commercial producer, for whom money is absolutely paramount because they're not supported by the state in any way, will find a star, somebody maybe with a high film and or television profile, and try and build a production around him or her.
How would you go about putting on a commercial play?
Well, if I had a play in my head that I wanted to direct and it had a cast of more than, say, 10, I'd be pretty foolish to take it to a commercial management because they would just say, I'm sorry, we can't afford it, unless you have Brad Pitt in it, in which case we'll fill every theatre in the country. We simply can't afford it. You have to be practical about these things. You have to know your audience, you have to know your producer. And most theatre managers spend most of their time trying to second guess what an audience will like. And more often than not, the things that are huge runaway successes, both artistically and commercially, you couldn't have predicted in a million years.
How would you go about making financial forecasts and budgeting for a new production?
How would I go about making financial forecasts? I suppose if you knew that you had a certain bankable star, then your forecast would be higher than if you were just taking the risk on a new play. If you were performing a brand new play with a good but not necessarily bankable cast, you would limit the number of performances. I think it would seem wise to do maybe 20 or 24 performances of a new play, not try and run it forever, and be very careful about the size of cast, because an awful lot of the budget of a production goes in actors' wages.
Yes, when you've got a budget, say you've got a production that you're going to mount and you're doing the budget, how does it break down?
It breaks down into creative team's fees, i.e. director, designer, lighting designer, sound designer, choreographer maybe, if this is sort of at full stretch, actors' fees, a set budget for building, making and maintaining the set, a costume budget for either hire or making of the costumes,
A properties budget, i.e. the things that are on the set, the objects that you will either have to, again, either hire or buy. And some of those will be called running props. That might be things that are consumed, cigarettes that are smoked, food that's eaten, plates that are broken. That has to be budgeted for as well. And then it's the running costs of the building, and that differs from if it's a subsidised repertory house or if it's not, if it's commercial. For instance, many subsidised reps have their own workshops where things are built, so you don't have to budget that over and above. Commercial projects which don't have a fixed building home, you would have to budget for having your set built out and then transported in to wherever you go.
And a budget then has to be reduced. Are there certain things that you would always go to first to cut?
I think you would look very, very, very carefully at how many people you could afford, because to change that at a late stage is fraught with peril, not only from a sort of sensitive and emotional side, but from a legal side. If somebody is sacked without deserving it, simply because you can't afford to hire them, then they would be well within their rights, and I'm sure Equity, the Actors Union, would help them to sue you management for every penny they had. So you get the people right and you stick to it. Scenic elements are the next most expensive thing. You might find that a set has a piece of very expensive technical equipment, for instance a video screen or something like that, which you might decide we just can't afford it, or a revolving stage, we just can't afford the revolve, or for instance many plays are set in rooms with 3 walls, obviously not 4 because you wouldn't be able to see.
So how would you finance a production? A commercial production we're talking about.
A commercial production, I would go to a producer. Assuming that I'm the director, I would go to a producer and say, I've got a marvellous idea. Let's do A Flea in Her Ear by Fado. I've got actors X and Y lined up who are interested in being in it. Can you do it for me? If the producer says, yes, I think we might be able to do this, it is then his or her job to raise the money. They would either put up money of their own, or if they're the big ones and they own theatres, then that makes it a little bit simpler, because you'd go into one of their theatres. Or a smaller, more independent producer would go to some rich backers known as angels, and they would say to them, we have this production coming up, do you want to buy a share in it? They might, for instance, sit down and say, okay, we'll send 100 packages out to people who we think might be interested in investing in our production, and they can invest in it at a level of their choice. They can buy units, if you like, in the production, and if you just fancy a flutter, you can buy a couple of units. If this is what you do and you want to take a big financial gamble in order possibly to reap a big financial reward, then you'll buy correspondingly a lot more units.
How long do you think a play has to run before it can break even in the West End?
I think a play that's been carefully budgeted and is not a hugely expensive one to front can probably break even in about 12 weeks.
Can you think of the proportion of London productions that make money versus the ones that don't make money?
No, I don't know the answer to that. I would have thought that the ones that don't make money are massively outweigh the ones that do. However, if you get one that does, it can be a cash cow for years and years.
And also, presumably, if the production company don't make money, they don't get to produce much more because they haven't got the money to put it on.
No, although producers are huge risk takers.
First tonight we talked to Paul Keane from the National Gallery in London about corporate sponsorship of arts events. Paul, Is sponsorship growing or is it going out of fashion?
Definitely not going out of fashion, Jenny. Corporate sponsorship of the arts is up about 50% on 10 years ago.
So it obviously takes quite a whack out of their budget. Why do they do it?
Well, there are lots of advantages to it. It can be great publicity if you get the right event or activity. You can get to people who would normally be impervious to your advertising. You can leave a pretty permanent reminder of your company's existence in a high-class public place. For example, a theatre bar might be named after you, or have the company logo in it. And you can associate yourself with some really high-class art or music or theatre, which does no end of good for your company image. Actually, for big organisations, I'd say that last point is the one which really gets them on board.
We hear about companies sponsoring arts events which actually appeal to quite a narrow audience, such as opera or ballet. Why do they do that?
That's interesting. But you must remember it's not the quantity of the audience, but the quality which counts. These elitist events tend to attract people with money. Not necessarily company directors, though I suppose there are a few of them, but certainly people who are likely to put money into the stock exchange. I mean, you may not sell more product, but you bring your company name to people who invest, and up goes your share price, hopefully. Neat, isn't it?
It sounds clever if it works like that. We've always heard about corporate sponsorship in the United States. Is it something which is catching on more in Europe?
In the last 10 years or so, certainly. Governments used to subsidise the arts much more than they do nowadays, so arts institutions have to get out there and find backers. Though they've really been helped in a lot of countries by bigger tax breaks. You know, what costs the company in real terms just about £200,000 can mean income of up to £1 million for the organisation receiving it.
What sort of activities do companies most like to sponsor?
I'd say that exhibitions in world-class galleries like the Tate are just about the most popular. It depends on what they're exhibiting, though. Music concerts are still pretty popular, although not so much nowadays, because they're fairly one-off. Exhibitions, on the other hand, go on for months and have people strolling around and taking their time and could be very beneficial for corporate image. Wouldn't you like your company to be associated with Matisse or Picasso? Then you read in the papers about Barclays Bank sponsoring the National Theatre, so there are no clear trends.
What gives an arts organisation an advantage in attracting money?
They need to be big and well known. Nowadays they have full-time fundraisers, perhaps as many as 20 or 30 working for them. And I think that's the crucial point. They're able to put a professionalism into it that smaller organisations find hard to compete with. Although it also helps to be located in somewhere like London, Paris or Berlin. Places out in the provinces are at a disadvantage unless they're really well known, like the Salzburg Festival or that sort of thing.
Now, what about smaller businesses? How can they benefit from sponsoring the arts?
In a number of ways, actually, and they can do it on quite a modest scale and still reap the benefits. Particularly, their employees feel that they're working to put something back into the local community and that the profits are not just going to the shareholders. It makes them feel more motivated and more closely tied to the company. A lesser point is that people in the local community may also view them differently, and companies may hope that they'll get more favourable treatment from their local politicians. But politicians are a changeable lot, and I wouldn't count on it.
Now, say an organisation, a theatre or an orchestra, was going to approach a company for funds. How should they go about it?
Good question. One thing which is definitely not too effective is to flood people with glossy brochures and videos and the like. Company decision makers see hundreds of them. No, The personal approach is better. One of your executives should go along and give a presentation accompanied by a 2-page executive summary explaining goals, needs, budgets and activities. Something snappy and businesslike.
Okay, and one final question. When a company is looking for something to sponsor, what criteria should they use?
In my opinion, you shouldn't look too much at visitor numbers. It may be okay, but it can rebound on you. You know, those exhibitions which attract thousands of people, long queues, many of whom are tourists from overseas and are never going to be your customers anyway. The main objective is that the event is compatible with the way you want people to see your company. What the newspapers say doesn't matter because they're not going to mention your sponsorship. Basically, the event has got to look right for you. Nothing else.
Thank you, Paul Keane. And now, troubles in the fixed line phone industry. Is it an obsolete technology or can it adapt to changing times?